The Vreth came on a Tuesday. Not that anyone on Aurelia 7 kept track of Earth days anymore, but Kaya Vasquez remembered it was a Tuesday because she had been teaching her little brother Dren how to clean a pulse rifle when the sky turned black with dropships. 12 of them. Fat, ugly things that screamed down through the atmosphere and shook the Red Canyon walls hard enough to crack windows in the residential blocks. 3 weeks later, the colony barely looked like a colony anymore. The Vreth had taken everything. Weapons first, then the food stores, then the communication tower, which they dismantled with the casual efficiency of someone pulling weeds. Commander Sithrak, a 7-foot reptilian officer with scales the color of wet slate and eyes like 2 chips of frozen amber, had announced through a translation drone that the colonists would be administered until further notice. Anyone caught outside their residential block after dark would be shot. Anyone caught hiding technology would be shot. Anyone caught attempting to contact off-world authorities would be shot. There was a lot of shooting in those first few days. Kaya stood at her window on the 3rd floor of Block 7 and watched a Vreth patrol drag old Mr. Hendricks out of his unit. He was 73. He had a bad hip and hands that shook from nerve damage he got working the mining rigs 20 years back. His crime was hiding a medical scanner under his mattress, a cheap diagnostic tool worth maybe 40 credits, the kind you could buy at any station market. They beat him in the street, 4 of them. Their armored fists rose and fell in a mechanical rhythm, like they were hammering a post into the ground. Mr. Hendricks stopped making sounds after the first 30 seconds, but they kept going for another minute. Kaya's hands went flat against the window glass. Her fingers spread wide. She counted the bones in her own knuckles, 1, 2, 3, 4, and she breathed through her nose until the red edges of her vision pulled back. Behind her, Dren coughed, that wet, rattling cough that had been getting worse every day since the Vreth activated their atmospheric terraforming rig on the eastern ridge. The machine pumped trace gases into Aurelia 7's air, subtle adjustments that made the environment more comfortable for Vreth biology. For humans, it was an irritant. For a 12-year-old boy with chronic pulmonary fibrosis, it was a slow execution. Kaya turned from the window. Dren sat on the edge of his cot, thin shoulders hunched, a rag pressed to his mouth. He looked up at her with their mother's eyes, dark, wide, too old for his face. She crossed the room and sat beside him, felt the vibration of his lungs working too hard. "I'm okay," he said. He was not okay. That evening, Mara Okafor called a meeting in the basement of Block 4. Mara was a geological engineer, broad-shouldered, steady-voiced, the kind of woman who could stare down a cave-in and start calculating load tolerances before the dust settled. When the colony's actual leadership had surrendered and been shipped off-world within the first 48 hours, Mara had simply stepped into the gap because nobody else did. 20 colonists crowded into the basement. Mara stood in front of them with her arms crossed. "I know what you're feeling," she said, "but I need everyone to hear me clearly. We comply, we survive. We wait for contact from the colonial authority. That is the plan. That is the only plan." Murmurs, some nodding. Most of the faces looked like people trying to convince themselves that waiting was the same as doing something. Kaya leaned against the back wall and said nothing. A man named Torres spoke up. He was a mechanic. Big hands, bad temper. "And if the authority doesn't come, it's been 3 weeks, Mara. No signal out, no signal in. For all we know, nobody even knows we've been taken." "They'll know," Mara said. "We missed 2 scheduled supply check-ins. Protocol kicks in after the 3rd. "Protocol." Torres said the word like it tasted sour. "Protocol won't stop them from killing us one by one while we wait." The room shifted. Mara held up her hands. "Nobody is killing anyone if we stay calm and stay inside." They want the colony's mineral output. They need us alive to run the rigs. We have value. That is our leverage. Kaya pushed off the wall and walked out. Nobody noticed. She was good at not being noticed. 17 years old. 5'4", built like a piece of canyon wire, all tendon and no padding. Brown hair pulled back in a knot that hadn't been washed in a week. The kind of face people looked past on their way to looking at someone more important. She moved through the residential block corridors, down 2 flights of service stairs, and out a maintenance hatch that the Vreth hadn't bothered to seal because it opened into a drainage channel too narrow for their armored bodies. Kaya was not armored. She was barely 110 pounds. She fit through the channel like water through a crack. The canyons at night were a different world. Aurelia 7's twin moons, one silver, one pale blue, threw overlapping shadows across the red rock, and the bioluminescent moss that grew in the deeper crevices pulsed with a faint green light, like the planet itself had a heartbeat. Kaya moved through the canyon network for 40 minutes, barefoot on stone, following a path she could walk blind. She had been walking these canyons since she was 8. Her father had taught her where to step, where to breathe, how to move through wind corridors without leaving thermal traces. He had been a hunter, not military, not special forces, just a man who understood that the canyon was alive, and if you listened to it, it would hide you. Her father had been dead for 2 years. Mining accident. Or that was what the company report said. Kaya had her own theories, but theories didn't bring people back. She reached the cache at the base of a split boulder her father had marked with a knife scratch when she was 10. She dug with her hands. 3 feet down, wrapped in thermal dampening cloth, she found what she came for. His rifle. A Kessler 9 Pulse Mod hunting model, 15 years old, stock scratched to hell, scope recalibrated so many times the adjustment dial was worn smooth. Military personnel would have called it a museum piece. Kaya called it teeth. She cleaned it in the moonlight, checked the charge pack, ran her thumb along the barrel the way her father used to. Then she climbed. The highest ridge overlooking the Vreth base was a 40-minute climb in daylight. Kaya did it in 55 in the dark, rifle slung across her back, fingers finding holds by memory and touch. She reached the top and lay flat on the stone, still warm from the day's heat. Below her, the Vreth base glowed with harsh blue-white floodlights. She could see the patrol routes, the guard towers. The shift changes happening with mechanical precision every 4 hours. She watched for a long time. She counted soldiers. She noted which routes overlapped and which ones left gaps. She marked the blind spots where the floodlights didn't reach. Her father had told her something once, sitting on this very ridge, watching a canyon cat stalk a herd animal 3 times its size. You don't fight what's bigger than you hunt it. Kaya pressed her cheek against the cool stone and began to plan. She didn't start with a kill. Kaya spent the first 2 nights doing nothing but moving. She mapped the Vreth sensor grid. 16 perimeter nodes arranged in a wide arc around the base, each one pinging every 12 seconds and feeding thermal data back to a central monitoring station. Her father had helped install the colony's original version of that same grid, back when the biggest threat was canyon cats wandering too close to the residential blocks. The Vreth had upgraded the hardware. They had not changed the architecture. On the 3rd night, she crawled on her belly through a drainage ditch and reached the first sensor node, a metal post the size of her forearm, bolted to a rock shelf. She didn't destroy it. Destroying it would trigger an alert. Instead, she opened the maintenance panel, rerouted the feedback loop so the node reported its own last clean scan on repeat, and sealed it back up. She did the same to 2 more nodes on the western perimeter. 3 blind spots, 3 doors into the canyon that the Vreth didn't know were open. On the 4th night, she killed for the first time. The target was a Vreth scout on a solo patrol along the outer canyon rim, the kind of routine sweep they ran every 6 hours to check for wildlife activity. He was walking a predictable line, helmet visor up because the night air was cool and the breath ran hot. He was 900 meters from Kaya's position on an elevated rock shelf across a wind corridor that funneled east to west at roughly 14 kilometers per hour. She had practiced this exact shot on canyon cats since she was 11. Different target, same math. She adjusted for wind, adjusted for the slightly downward slope, took one breath in, and let half of it out. The pulse round crossed the distance in less than a second. The scout dropped mid-step. No stumble, no stagger. His legs just stopped being interested in holding him up, and he folded into the dust like a coat slipping off a hook. Kaya stayed on the shelf for another 20 minutes, watching through the scope. No response, no alarm. The body lay in a shallow depression between two rock formations, invisible from the patrol route unless someone walked directly to it. They found him at shift change, 6 hours later. Commander Sithrak reviewed the report in his command center, a prefabricated structure bolted to the floor of the colony's old town hall. One dead scout, single wound, no witnesses, no tracks. He assigned the incident to wildlife. Aurelia 7's canyon ecosystem included several predatory species capable of killing a Vreth soldier, and the outer patrols were known risk assignments. He ordered the body processed and doubled the patrol frequency on that sector. This was his first mistake. Doubling the patrols meant more soldiers walking more routes on tighter schedules. It meant predictability multiplied. It meant Kaya could sit on any ridge in the Western Canyon network and watch the Vreth move below her like pieces on a game board, each one arriving at a precise location at a precise time. She took her second kill 2 nights later, a communications officer walking a ridgetop relay check. Single shot. He fell behind a boulder and wasn't found until the next morning. The third was a perimeter guard who had stopped to adjust his boot seal at the exact spot where a narrow canyon trail bent out of sight from the nearest guard tower. Kaya had watched him stop at that same spot 3 nights in a row. Creature of habit. She was in position an hour before he arrived. Single shot. Center mass. He sat down like someone had pulled a chair out from under him. 9 days into her campaign. 3 dead Vreth. 0 alarms. On the 10th night, the radio chatter changed. Kaya had stolen a Vreth communication unit from the body of her second kill. A small earpiece and wrist transmitter that she had spent 2 days figuring out how to operate. The Vreth encrypted their channels, but they used a rotating cipher that repeated every 72 hours, and Kaya had her father's old code-breaking tools from his hunting days. Canyon hunters used similar encryption to coordinate pack hunts without alerting prey. She lay in a crevice on the western ridge, wrapped in thermal dampening cloth, and listened. A voice, shaking, not from cold. "Command, this is Patrol 7. We have another kill. Single round, long range, no trace of the shooter. Request immediate thermal sweep of Sector 12. Command, who is targeting us out here?" Then another voice, a different patrol, Southern Canyon. "Command, Patrol 3. We found drag marks near the Western Pass. The previous body. It was moved. Someone relocated the body to delay our discovery. This isn't wildlife, Command. Wildlife doesn't hide what it kills." A long pause. The static hissed like something breathing. Then Sithrak's voice cut through. Cold, flat. The voice of a commander who had just been forced to reclassify a nuisance as a threat. "All units, we have a hostile. Unknown number, unknown position. Full sensor sweep, all sectors. Night patrols are to operate in pairs. No exceptions. Find them." Kaya pulled the earpiece out and set it on the rock beside her. The twin moons hung above the canyon rim, like two unblinking eyes. She allowed herself a small, thin smile, the kind that was less about happiness and more about the quiet satisfaction of watching something work exactly the way she had built it to work. Back in the colony, the rumors spread the way rumors always do, in whispers, in glances, in the slight straightening of spines that had been hunched for weeks. Something was happening in the canyons. The Vreth patrols were nervous. You could see it in the way they walked. Tighter formations, weapons up, heads swiveling. 2 nights ago, a patrol of 6 had come back as a patrol of 5, and nobody explained why. Mara Okafor heard the rumors and felt her stomach drop. She found Kaya in Block 7, sitting on the floor beside Dren's cot, reading to him from a battered paperback. Dren was asleep. His breathing was a shallow, ragged whistle that filled the small room like a broken instrument. Mara stood in the doorway. "It's you," she said. "Not a question." Kaya turned a page. "Whatever you think you're doing out there," Mara said, keeping her voice low, "you need to stop, right now. When they figure out what's happening, they won't come after you. They'll come after us. All of us. They'll line people up in the street and start shooting until someone gives you up." Kaya closed the book, set it on the floor, looked up at Mara with an expression that was much older than 17. "They're already killing us," she said. "That rig pumps poison into the air every hour. Dren lost 4% lung capacity this week. 4%. The medical scanner Mr. Hendricks was hiding, the one they beat him half to death for, that was Dren's. I asked him to hold it because they'd already searched our unit twice." She stood. She was a full head shorter than Mara. "You want to wait for the Colonial Authority? That's fine. Wait. But Dren doesn't have that kind of time, and neither does anyone else in this colony with a respiratory condition. I counted 9 of them. 9 people breathing a little less every day. So you do your math, Mara, and I'll do mine." She picked the book back up and sat down beside her brother. Mara stood there for a long time. Then she left without another word. That night, Kaya went back to the canyons. She checked her rifle. She checked her thermal wraps. She checked the 3 blind spots in the sensor grid that the Vreth still hadn't found. Then she climbed to her ridge and waited for the patrols to come. Sithrak stood in the command center and stared at the holographic map of the canyon network. 9 blue dots marked where his soldiers had been found. 9 dots, scattered across the western and southern canyons, no 2 closer than 400 meters apart, no 2 killed from the same angle. He had lost 9 soldiers in 16 days to something he couldn't see, couldn't track, and couldn't predict. He activated the Fang Squad. Every Vreth garrison had one, a 6-soldier hunter-killer unit trained specifically for counterinsurgency operations. They were the best the Dominion produced. Fast, silent, patient. They had put down rebellions on 14 worlds. They had tracked guerrilla fighters through acid swamps, frozen mountain ranges, and underground tunnel systems that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. Their leader, a scarred veteran named Kith, had personally killed 37 insurgents across 9 campaigns. Sithrak briefed them in the command center. He pulled up the kill data, the patrol logs, the sensor records. "One shooter," he said. "Long range, high accuracy, familiar with the terrain. They are using our sensor blind spots, which means they understand our grid architecture. They are taking single shots and relocating before we can respond. They have not missed once." Kif studied the map. His eyes, yellow, slick-pupilled, moved from dot to dot, tracing lines, calculating distances. "Pattern?" he asked. "None that we've found. Kills are spread across sectors, with no repeating location or timing. The only constant is methodology. Single pulse round, long range, clean withdrawal." Kith nodded. "Give us 3 days." He didn't get 3 days. Kaya watched the Fang Squad deploy from her position on a ledge 2 kilometers north of the base. 6 soldiers, moving in a spread formation, using terrain cover and hand signals instead of radio communication. They were good. She could see that immediately. They moved like canyon cats, low, fluid, aware of sightlines. She felt the first real spike of fear since this had started. A cold needle between her ribs that she breathed through and filed away. She couldn't fight these six the way she had fought the patrols. They were too skilled, too coordinated, and they were actively looking for her. A long-range shot would give away her position, and they would close the distance before she could relocate. So she changed the game. She spent the first day watching them, learning their formation, their search pattern, the way they communicated with hand signals. She memorized one by one. She noted which member took point, which one watched their back trail, and which one, a younger soldier on the left flank, kept glancing up at the canyon rims instead of watching his sector. On the second day, she started building. Kaya had grown up in these canyons. She knew things about this rock that no sensor grid could tell you. She knew which cliff faces were held together by nothing but friction and habit. She knew where the underground water channels ran close enough to the surface that a vibration charge would turn solid ground into a mud trap. She knew which narrow passages created echo chambers that could bounce a sound source in 6 directions at once. She spent 14 hours preparing a kill zone in a canyon passage called the Throat, a narrow corridor between 2 vertical rock walls, roughly 80 meters long and barely wide enough for 3 Vreth to walk side by side. One way in from the south, one way in from the north. No exits. At the southern entrance, she rigged a rock slide. 2 mining charges buried in the cliff face, wired to a trigger she could operate from the rim above. At the northern entrance, she placed a speaker, a small device pulled from a broken entertainment console in Block 7, loaded with a looped recording of human footsteps on gravel, set to activate on a timer. Along the canyon walls inside the Throat, she smeared chemical heat packets at irregular intervals, the kind hunters use to confuse canyon cat thermal vision. To Vreth sensors, each one would read as a possible human heat signature. Then she climbed to her position on the rim and waited. The Fang squad entered the southern mouth of the Throat at dusk. They were following a trail she had laid, actual footprints, pressed into soft ground at the right depth and spacing for a human her size. The trail led into the Throat and disappeared on the hard rock floor inside. Kaif took point. His squad followed in a tight column, weapons up, sensors scanning. The speaker at the northern end activated. Footsteps, faint, moving away. Kaif raised a fist. The squad froze. He pointed north. The target was ahead of them, moving. They advanced. The chemical heat packets bloomed on their sensors. One on the left wall, one on the right, one 30 meters ahead. Kaif's second-in-command hissed a warning. Multiple heat signatures. The insurgent wasn't alone. That moment of confusion, that half-second, where training met uncertainty and the brain tried to rewrite the tactical picture. Kaya triggered the southern rock slide. The cliff face above the entrance came down in a roaring cascade of red stone and dust, sealing the passage behind the squad. The sound was enormous, a physical wall of noise that slammed through the narrow corridor and rattled off every surface. Before the dust cleared, Kaya was firing. She shot from the rim, straight down into the Throat. The angle was almost vertical, a nightmare for the soldiers below, who had to crane their necks and aim upward while standing in a cloud of dust with false heat signatures screaming across their sensors. Her first shot took the rear guard through the top of his helmet. He collapsed without a sound. Her second shot hit Kaif's second-in-command in the shoulder. He spun and went down, firing wildly upward with his good arm. The squad scattered, or tried to. In a corridor 4 meters wide, there was nowhere to scatter to. They pressed against the walls, firing up at the rim, but Kaya had already moved. She was running along the canyon edge, appearing above them for 2 seconds, firing, and disappearing again, each time from a different spot. She took 2 more in the next 30 seconds, one through the throat, one through the knee. He dropped, and she finished him with a second round before he could raise his weapon. Kaith and the surviving squad member broke north. They scrambled over the rocks at the far end of the throat and ran. Kaya let them go. She didn't need to kill all 6. She needed the survivors to talk. Kaith made it back to base with 1 soldier, both of them covered in dust and blood that wasn't entirely theirs. He stood in the command center, in front of Sithrak and the holographic map, and for the first time in a career that spanned 14 worlds, his voice was not steady. "It's 1 shooter. 1. Sithrak waited. "The thermal profile we captured during the engagement, before the decoys corrupted our readings. Command, the target is a juvenile, a human adolescent, female, based on body dimensions. Under adult development thresholds." The command center went quiet. Not the quiet of calm, the quiet of something important breaking inside a room full of soldiers who had never considered this possible. "She moved through that canyon like she grew up in it," Kaith said. "She built that ambush in less than 48 hours using materials we wouldn't have classified as weapons. She anticipated our search pattern, our formation, our reaction time. We couldn't track her. We couldn't hear her. She killed 4 of my soldiers in under a minute, and chose to let us live." He paused. "She let us live, so we would come back and tell you what she is." Sithrak stood very still. The holographic map glowed blue against his slate-colored scales. 11 dots now, 11 dead. A teenager. He felt something shift behind his ribs. Something unfamiliar. He was a commander who had broken colonies on 6 worlds. He had crushed rebellions, led by trained military insurgents with decades of combat experience. He was losing to a child. The next morning, he ordered every colonist out of their residential blocks and into the central square. 200 humans, lined up in rows, surrounded by armed Vreth soldiers. Sithrak walked the rows. His boots clicked on the paved ground. "You have a killer among you," he said through the translation drone. "A murderer who is hiding in your canyons and attacking my soldiers. You will deliver this person to me within 24 hours, or I will begin executing 1 colonist every hour until they reveal themselves." Silence. 200 faces blank with fear. Mara stood in the front row. She did not look at Kaya, who stood 3 rows back, thin and dust-free and perfectly unremarkable between a mining technician and an old woman with a cane. Nobody pointed. 24 hours came and went. Sithrak did not start executing colonists. Not because of mercy, because a report had crossed his desk that morning. The colony's mineral output had dropped to 0 since the occupation began. Dead workers couldn't mine, and the Dominion High Command had made it very clear that minerals were the reason they were here. He needed them alive, and they knew it, and he knew they knew it. In her room that night, Kaya sat on the floor and disassembled her comm unit. She had been listening to Vreth radio traffic for 2 hours. The soldiers were scared. She could hear it in the way they talked. Too loud, too fast, filling the silence with chatter, because silence meant something could be out there, listening. She reassembled the comm unit, adjusted the frequency, and began transmitting false intelligence, fragmented, garbled messages in broken Vreth that suggested multiple human fighters operating in coordinated cells across the canyon network. By morning, the garrison believed they were facing an organized resistance. They were facing a girl with a dead father's rifle and absolutely nothing left to lose. Sithrak made his decision on a cold morning when the canyon wind blew hard enough to rattle the command center walls. 40 soldiers, nearly a quarter of his remaining garrison. He would take them personally into the canyons with orbital-grade thermal scanners, drone support, and enough firepower to level a small city. He would sweep the western and southern networks, grid by grid, canyon by canyon, rock by rock, until he found the girl, or buried her under so much stone that it wouldn't matter. His second-in-command, a thick-necked officer named Drawl, questioned the plan exactly once. "Commander, pulling 40 soldiers from the base reduces our garrison to, I am aware of the numbers. The perimeter will be exposed. If the human resistance, there is no resistance." Scythrak pulled on his field armor. Each piece locked into place with a sound like a jaw snapping shut. "I will not sit in this command center and allow a juvenile to dictate the tactical posture of a Dominion garrison. We end this today." Drawl said nothing more. Kaya watched them leave from a position she had never used before. A shallow cave on the eastern ridge, far from her usual hunting grounds. She lay on her stomach with the scope pressed to her eye, and counted them as they filed into the canyon mouth. 10, 20, 30, 40, plus Sithrak at the rear, unmistakable in his black command armor. 40 soldiers heading west, into the canyons, looking for her. She lowered the scope. She was not in the canyons. The idea had come to her 3 nights ago while she was listening to Vreth radio chatter. A logistics officer complaining about generator load. A maintenance crew arguing about coolant line pressure in the atmospheric terraforming rig. A guard reporting that the eastern maintenance tunnel, the one that connected the old colony infrastructure to the base's utility grid, had a faulty seal on hatch 17, and could someone please log a repair ticket because he was tired of the draft. Hatch 17. Her father had installed that hatch. She had handed him the bolts. She waited until Sithrak's column was deep enough in the canyons that their return would take at least 90 minutes at combat speed. Then, she moved. The eastern ridge descent took 20 minutes. She crossed a dry riverbed that ran behind the colony's old water processing plant, abandoned since the Vreth redirected the water supply to their own base. She followed the riverbed to a concrete drainage pipe that led underground, into the network of maintenance tunnels her father had mapped on a folded piece of paper that she had kept in her boot for 2 years. They smelled like copper and dust and the particular chemical sweetness of degraded insulation. Kaya moved through them by touch and memory. Her father's map unfolded in her mind like a song she knew so well. She couldn't forget it, even if she tried. She reached hatch 17 in 40 minutes. The seal was broken, just like the guard had reported. She pushed it open and entered the base utility grid. The base was quiet, not empty. The remaining garrison held positions at guard towers, the command center, and the residential block checkpoints. But with 40 soldiers in the canyons, the interior was thin. Skeleton crew. The kind of staffing that assumed threats came from outside. Kaya moved through the utility corridors beneath the base floor. Above her, she could hear Vreth boots, voices, the hum of machines. She passed beneath the barracks, beneath the mess hall, beneath the armory. She stopped beneath the atmospheric terraforming rig. The rig was a massive piece of machinery, a cylindrical structure the size of a 2-story building, bolted to a reinforced platform on the base's eastern edge. It drew power from a dedicated reactor core and pumped modified atmospheric compounds through a distribution network that spread across the colony. The low hum it produced was constant. She had heard it every night for 3 weeks, in Dren's coughing, in the shallow breaths of 9 colonists, whose lungs were slowly filling with fluid they couldn't clear. She pressed her hand flat against the tunnel ceiling. She could feel the rig's vibration through the metal, a deep, steady pulse. She set the charges, 4 mining detonators, the same type she had used for the canyon rock slides, but configured for maximum blast yield. She placed them at the 4 structural joints, where the rig's reactor core connected to its main housing. It was not a subtle arrangement. It was not designed to be. She wired the triggers to a single remote detonator and set a 60-second delay. Then she moved to the armory. The armory was adjacent to the rig, a reinforced storage building containing the garrison's reserve weapons, ammunition, and fuel cells. Kaya didn't enter it. She didn't need to. She placed a fifth charge on the shared wall between the armory and the rig's reactor platform. When the reactor went, the armory would follow. She checked the time. Sithrak's column had been in the canyons for just over an hour. They would have reached her decoy camp by now. A carefully staged site she had built over 2 days, complete with cold fire pit, scattered food wrappers, sleeping impression in the dirt, and a set of false tracks leading deeper into the canyon network. Written in broken Vreth script on a flat piece of rock, using charcoal from the fire pit. You are not hunting me. I am hunting you. She allowed herself 3 seconds to appreciate that. Then she moved. She was halfway back through the utility corridor when the remote detonator's signal light turned green. 60 seconds. She started running. She made it to hatch 17 when the first charge blew. The sound was not loud from inside the tunnel. It was a sensation more than a noise. A deep thump that traveled through the metal walls and floor and hit her in the chest like a fist. Then the second charge. Third. Fourth. The fifth, the armory wall, was a different kind of explosion. It was louder, sharper, and it kept going. Chain detonations, fuel cells cooking off in sequence, each one igniting the next. The tunnel shook hard enough to knock dust from the ceiling in thick gray sheets. Kaya ran. She was back in the drainage pipe when the base's emergency sirens began to wail. She was in the dry riverbed when she saw the column of black smoke rising from the eastern side of the compound, thick and oily against the pale morning sky. She was climbing the eastern ridge when she heard the shouting. A Vreth lieutenant rounded a corner of the utility building and saw her. 20 meters. He was young, younger than most of the garrison, and his eyes went wide in a way that was almost human. His hand went to his sidearm. Kaya didn't have time to reach for her rifle. It was slung across her back, and her hands were occupied with the climb. She dropped from the rock face, landed hard on her side, and rolled as the first plasma shot scorched the ground where her head had been. The lieutenant charged. He was bigger, faster, on flat ground. He covered the distance in 3 strides, and swung the sidearm toward her face. Kaya rolled under the swing, and came up inside his reach, too close for him to aim. She drove her elbow into the soft tissue beneath his jaw, a spot her father had shown her on a canyon cat anatomy chart, the place where the major blood vessels ran close to the surface. The Vreth were built differently, but the principle held. Hit the soft parts, hard. The lieutenant staggered. Kaya grabbed his weapon arm with both hands and twisted. He was stronger, much stronger, but she had leverage and desperation and a body that was built for exactly this kind of ugly, close-range survival. The sidearm came free. She didn't aim. She pressed it against his chest plate and fired twice. The plasma rounds punched through the armor at contact distance, and the lieutenant dropped. Kaya stood over him, breathing hard. Her ribs screamed. The fall from the rock face had cracked at least 2. Her hands were shaking. The sidearm felt too big and too heavy and all wrong in her grip. She took his ammunition. She took his comm unit. She left the body and disappeared into the smoke. Sithrak received the transmission in the middle of the canyon network, standing over the decoy camp, reading the note she had left for him. The words were still processing in his mind when Dral's voice came through the radio, tight with something that sounded like it was trying very hard not to be panic. Commander, the terraforming rig is destroyed. The armory is gone. The fuel depot is burning. We have significant structural damage to the eastern compound. Sithrak stood motionless. The charcoal note stared up at him from the flat rock. How? It was not a question. It was a sound a machine makes when something breaks inside it. She came into the base, Commander, while we were out here. She walked into our base, and I understand what she did. He turned and looked at the 40 soldiers standing behind him in the canyon, armed to their scales, hunting for a girl who was behind them the entire time. Every one of them had the same expression, the expression of predators who had just realized they were prey. All units returned to base, maximum speed. They returned to a ruin. A third of the eastern compound was still burning. The armory was a crater. The terraforming rig, the machine that had been slowly reshaping Aurelia 7's atmosphere to Vreth's specifications, was a twisted skeleton of melted metal and shattered housing. Drawl met him at the command center. "Do we request reinforcements?" Sithrak stared at the smoke. He said nothing for a very long time. The air changed first. Without the terraforming rig, Aurelia 7's atmosphere began reverting to its natural composition within hours. The trace gases the Vreth had been pumping, the ones that made the air comfortable for reptilian lungs and slowly poisonous for human ones, dissipated like fog burning off under a morning sun. Dren noticed before anyone else. He woke up on the second morning after the explosion, sat up in his cot, and took a breath. A full one. Deep. Clean. His lungs expanded without rattling, without the wet crackling sound that had followed him for 3 weeks like a second heartbeat. He looked at Kaya, who was sitting on the floor next to his cot, cleaning the stolen Vreth sidearm. She looked up. "It doesn't hurt," he said. She put the sidearm down. She pressed her hand against his chest and felt it rise and fall. Steady, strong. She pressed her lips together and nodded once and picked the sidearm back up. There would be time for the other thing later. Right now, the clock was running. Because the same atmospheric shift that let Dren breathe was slowly strangling the Vreth. Their biology required specific gas concentrations, elevated methane traces, reduced oxygen, that Aurelia 7's natural atmosphere did not provide. Without the rig, every hour brought the air closer to a composition that made their lungs work harder, their reflexes slower, their body temperatures harder to regulate. The occupiers were now the ones being poisoned. Sithrak knew it. He stood in the command center, half of which still smelled like smoke and melted circuitry, and reviewed his options. They were not good options. His garrison was down to just over 100 soldiers. He had lost 40% of his ammunition in the armory explosion. His soldiers were demoralized, breathing air that made them sluggish and irritable, and jumping at canyon shadows. He could request reinforcements. A transport from the nearest Dominion staging world would take 8 days. 8 days of breathing air that got worse by the hour. 8 days of a ghost in the canyons picking off his soldiers one by one. Or he could end it now. Take the colony, hold the colonists, use them as leverage to draw the sniper out and force a surrender. Then he could sit inside the sealed residential blocks, which still had their own atmospheric systems, and wait for reinforcements in breathable air. It was not a good plan, but it was the only one that didn't involve admitting to the Dominion High Command that a single human teenager had dismantled his garrison. He ordered the assault at dawn. Kaya heard it on the stolen comm unit. All channels, open broadcast. All units, full advance on the residential sector. Secure all structures. Detain all colonists. Lethal force authorized against resistance. She was ready. Not because she was a military genius. Not because she had some grand tactical vision. She was ready because for the past week, between canyon runs and sabotage operations and 3 hours of sleep a night, she had been doing something much harder than fighting. She had been teaching. It started with Torres. The big mechanic had found her cleaning her rifle in the Block 7 basement 3 days after the terraforming rig explosion. He had stood in the doorway, arms folded, jaw set, and said 5 words. "Show me how to shoot." Then Lena Park, 19, former colony security trainee who had been 2 weeks away from her certification when the Vreth arrived. She already knew how to handle a weapon. She needed to know how to disappear. Then Osei. then Margolis. Then the Tan brothers, who were 17 and could move through the canyons almost as well as Kaya, because they had spent their childhoods doing the same thing she had, running the ridges, climbing the walls, learning the stone. 8 people. Kaya's father had kept a second weapons cache, smaller than the first, but enough for 8. Hunting rifles, 2 pulse pistols, a box of mining charges. She trained them in 3-hour sessions, deep in the canyons, at night. She taught them what her father had taught her. Move low, breathe slow. The canyon hides you if you let it. Don't aim where the target is. Aim where the target will be. One shot, relocate, vanish. They were not soldiers. They were miners and mechanics and teenagers and an engineer who had never fired a weapon before last Tuesday. Their hands shook. Their groupings were terrible. 2 of them couldn't climb worth a damn. And they were breathing clean air for the first time in a month. And every single one of them had watched the Vreth beat someone they loved. Anger made bad shooters into decent ones. Purpose made decent shooters into dangerous ones. At dawn, Sithrak's forces moved on the colony in 3 columns, south, west, and center. 100 soldiers in full combat armor, moving through the streets toward the residential blocks with the mechanical confidence of a force that had done this a dozen times on a dozen worlds. They reached the edge of the residential sector and entered the canyon corridor that connected the base to the colony proper. A 300-meter stretch of road, flanked by low canyon walls on both sides. The first shot came from the western ridge. It hit the lead soldier in the center column and dropped him in the road. The sound echoed through the corridor and bounced off every surface, making it impossible to locate the source. Sithrak's soldiers reacted the way they were trained to react. They spread to cover, formed defensive positions, and began scanning the ridges. The second shot came from the eastern ridge, a different position, a different angle, another soldier down. Then a third, from the south, a fourth, from a position so far north it shouldn't have been possible for the same shooter. Because it wasn't the same shooter. It was 8 shooters, spread across both canyon ridges, positioned behind cover in locations Kaya had chosen for their sightlines and their escape routes. They were not accurate. They were not fast. One of them, Torres, was shaking so badly that his first 3 shots missed entirely, and punched holes in the canyon wall 6 meters from his target. His 4th shot didn't miss. The Vreth column stalled. The soldiers were taking fire from both sides, from positions they couldn't pinpoint, from a number of enemies they couldn't count. Their thermal scanners, degraded by the atmospheric shift, gave them blurred readings that could have been 2 shooters or 20. Sithrak screamed orders into his comm. Advance, push through, reach the residential blocks. His soldiers tried. They surged forward into the corridor, firing up at the ridges, moving in a disciplined rush toward the colony. That was when Kaya detonated the mining charges she had buried in the road surface 2 nights ago. The center of the corridor erupted. Not enough to kill. She wasn't trying to kill with the charges. She was trying to stop movement. A crater opened in the road 4 meters wide. The advance column split, half on one side, half on the other. Momentum broken. The ridge shooters poured fire into the stalled formation. It was nothing like the clean, precise campaign Kaya had waged alone in the canyons. Lena Park was crying while she shot. Torres was screaming profanity in 2 languages. One of the Tan brothers took a plasma graze across his shoulder and kept firing with the rifle braced against a rock because he couldn't lift it anymore. It was enough. The Vreth officers began to fall. Kaya was on the highest ridge, the same one she had climbed on her first night, the place where this had started. She lay flat on the warm stone with her father's rifle, and she did what she had always done. 1 shot, relocate. 1 shot, relocate. Each time her scope settled on a squad leader, a communications officer, an armor-plated figure giving orders. Every time an officer fell, the squad below him fragmented. Soldiers who had been trained to follow commands stopped receiving commands. They milled. They hesitated. 2 of them broke and ran back toward the base. Then more. Sithrak watched his assault crumble from the rear of the center column. He watched soldiers, Dominion soldiers, the finest in the sector, turn and run from a canyon full of miners with hunting rifles. Something broke in him. Not fear. Something worse than fear. The particular humiliation of a predator who discovers too late and too completely that he has been wrong about the food chain his entire life. He left his column. He left his soldiers. He moved alone, climbing the eastern ridge with a plasma blade in one hand and a sidearm in the other. His black command armor scraping against red rock as he hauled himself upward toward the position where the most accurate fire was coming from. He found her on the ridgetop. She was smaller than he had imagined. Thin, dirty. Her left arm was wrapped in a makeshift bandage, spotted with blood. She held that old hunting rifle in hands that should have been too young for any of this. She saw him and rolled to her feet. The rifle came up. Sithrak fired first. The plasma shot clipped her shoulder, and she spun, dropping the rifle. It clattered across the stone and stopped at the edge of the ridge. He advanced. The plasma blade hummed in his hand. Blue-white light crawled across the edge. Kaya backed toward the narrow rock bridge behind her, a natural stone arch that connected this ridge to the next, spanning a canyon drop of 60 meters. She had crossed it 100 times. She had rigged it yesterday. Sithrak followed. The bridge was narrow enough that his wide armored body filled it edge to edge. He raised the blade. Kaya stopped in the middle of the bridge. She was breathing hard. Blood ran down her arm and dripped from her fingertips onto the stone. She looked at him, straight into those amber eyes. "You came to our world," she said, "and you thought we were prey." She pulled the detonator from her belt and triggered the charge. The bridge cracked. Not an explosion, a fracture. The stone split along a seam she had weakened with a precision charge, and the far half of the bridge dropped away in a cascade of red rock and dust. Sithrak fell. His claws scraped the edge. Found nothing. The canyon swallowed him without ceremony. Kaya didn't fall. She had stopped 3 steps short of the fracture line. But the shockwave knocked her sideways, and her feet went out from under her, and she slid toward the edge, with her hands grabbing at flat stone that offered nothing to hold. Her fingers caught the lip. Her body swung over the drop. One hand, 60 meters of air below her. Her grip was failing. Her shoulders screamed. The blood on her fingers made the stone slick. 2 hands closed around her wrist. Small hands, strong for their size. He was on his stomach, face red with effort, both hands locked around her arm. Behind him, Torres grabbed the back of Dren's shirt with one massive fist and pulled. Kaya came up over the edge and collapsed on the stone. She lay on her back, staring at the sky, chest heaving. Dren sat beside her, breathing hard, breathing clean. Below the ridge, the remaining Vreth soldiers had stopped fighting. Without Sithrak, without officers, without ammunition or fuel or breathable air, the calculation was simple. They laid down their weapons in the road and waited. Mara Okafor walked out of the residential block and began negotiating their departure. The Vreth transport lifted off 2 days later. Kaya watched it from the ridge. The engines left a heat shimmer in the air that made the canyon walls ripple like water. Dren sat beside her, legs dangling over the edge, throwing pebbles into the canyon below. He was breathing. Just breathing. The simplest thing in the world. Kaya put her arm around him. The rifle lay across her knees, scratched, dented, warm from the sun. Her father's gun. 6 weeks later, a Vreth intelligence report was filed to the Dominion High Command. It was classified at the highest security level and distributed to every garrison commander in the sector. It read, in part, Aurelia 7 garrison, lost. Total personnel casualties, 63. Cause, single human insurgent. Subsequently supported by a civilian militia of approximately 8 individuals. Primary combatant, human female, 17 local years of age. No military training, no augmentation, no off-world support. Assessment, current Dominion threat classification of species Homo sapiens as minimal, non-combatant is critically inadequate. Recommend immediate reclassification to apex predator. Extreme caution advised for all future engagement. Recommend suspension of all colonial expansion operations in human-occupied space pending full strategic review. They are not what we thought they were. On the ridge, Kaya said nothing. The sun was warm. Her brother was breathing. The canyons stretched out below her, red and ancient and hers.